Does science fiction conflict with the physics of consciousness? Science fiction is full of interesting ideas like mind uploading, or the consciousness of artificial intelligence, or brain copying, teleportation, conscious computers, creating a digital brain, and lots of other very interesting concepts. And the question is, will this science fiction at some point become a reality or not? Are these actually possible? And I think the answer is no, that they violate the laws of physics. My name is Andrew Knight. I have degrees in nuclear engineering from the University of Florida and MIT, and a law degree from Georgetown University. I have taught at the college and high school level both mathematics and physics, and I have 17 patents on a variety of technologies. Now, that doesn't mean that what I'm about to tell you is correct, but I hope that it at least qualifies me to make the arguments. So I have written, or I've created, 2 other YouTube videos. One is called Why Computers Will Never Be Conscious, and this is a take on consciousness from the perspective of special relativity. And I created a second video, Why Mind Uploading, Brain Copying, and Conscious Computers Are Impossible. And this looks at consciousness from the perspective of correlations to underlying quantum states. The purpose of this video is really just a teaser. My wife thought it would be a great idea to just give a very short presentation to these ideas, given that this video is about an hour and this is about an hour and a half, and you may not be interested in those proofs. But for those who are interested in what I have to say, they will flesh out the ideas and the arguments and the proofs much more thoroughly than I will do here. The first video, which is called Why Computers Will Never Be Conscious, looks at consciousness from the perspective of special relativity, and I propose a theorem, the single stream of consciousness theorem, which states essentially that a person cannot experience more than one stream of consciousness from a given conscious state. And an implication, several implications of this, which I show in the other video, are that if this theorem is true, that a conscious state cannot be copied or repeated, and consciousness is not algorithmic. And the implications of those are potentially huge. So, how do I go about proving this theorem? I use special relativity, and what I do is I consider 2 instances of some conscious state created by some underlying physical state, and I consider that they are space-like separated. And what that means, essentially, is that information cannot pass between them because they're too far apart. And then I also consider 2 instances of conscious states that are time-like separated, and in both cases I can show that whatever the person experiences, it's only going to be at most one stream of consciousness. Now I'll just give you a little teaser of what that proof looks like, just the space-like separated instances. This will be very brief. So let's say that there is some point in space-time that this underlying physical state creates a conscious state C1. And what we're going to do, this is the light cone, such that whatever is on the outside is space-like and whatever is on the inside is time-like. What we're going to do is we're going to copy that state in a time-like fashion and then see how it evolves. So maybe it evolves to some state C2. And then now I'm going to also show the light cone for that, and I'm going to create a second instance of that state C1 that is space-like to this instance over here. And of course, then that can evolve to some state C2. Now, as of right now, there doesn't seem to be a problem. It doesn't seem to be a problem with the notion of disassembling this person's brain, assuming that's what creates this conscious state, and then reassembling it, or something similar, to create the same underlying physical state over here, and then it evolves, and the person experiences some stream of consciousness that maybe skips over or blips over this, then experiences C1 to C2. And there doesn't seem to be a problem with this second example either, from going from C1 to C2. These two don't conflict because it's the same stream of consciousness. And in fact, if for some reason that first instance did not make it to state C2, maybe it was destroyed right after that, then there's no reason to think that the person couldn't then experience the same stream of consciousness from C1 to C2 by this path. The problem becomes when that first instance, because of, say, of some quantum event, it does not stream to the same state C2, but rather goes to some different state. I call it C2 prime here. And the problem with this is we have to ask then, what does the person actually experience? So either let's say they experience no stream of consciousness because this screwed up everything. Well, that's problematic because these are space-like separated events. There's no way for this stream of consciousness to receive the information of this change in the stream of consciousness. So it can't be neither. And if it's both, I think it makes sense that this conscious state, which depends on the underlying physical state, depends on information contained in that physical state. So how could it be possible for a person to experience this stream and this stream, which depends on information in the underlying states, if those underlying states are space-like separated? So that's not possible either. So the only possibility is that the person can only experience one stream of consciousness, which is what is going to prove the single stream of consciousness theorem. But it's going to turn out that that is going to make the copying, the secondary copying of the state impossible. And essentially it's because there is no way for nature to choose one of these states or the other because they're physically identical. So we run into a problem there. So again, this is not the entire proof. This is just a very quick snippet to give you an idea of what the other video states and argues. The second video, why mind uploading, brain copying, and conscious computers are impossible, comes to similar conclusions, but with an entirely different argument train. What I try to prove is the unique history theorem, which is not stated here, but that just essentially that every conscious state uniquely determines its own history of previous conscious states. And why is that? It's because every conscious state correlates to some underlying physical state, and every physical state is itself history dependent because of quantum mechanics. So the implications are very similar. They are that a conscious state cannot be copied or repeated, and consciousness itself is not algorithmic. The way I prove it is by quantum mechanics. The first thing I do is I assume that there is no free will, and that therefore, if there are any non-deterministic branchings in the universe, then they have to be quantum mechanical in nature. So what I'll do is I'll consider conscious states that are correlated to the different outcomes of some quantum mechanical event. And then I'm going to ask whether or not it's possible for them to ultimately merge or evolve to the same conscious state that is uncorrelated to that quantum mechanical event. And if it's not possible to do that, then that must mean that every conscious state embeds within itself the history of prior conscious states. So very quickly, again, this will not be the proof, but this will kind of give you an idea of the path that I choose. So this cloud represents an underlying physical state S from which some conscious state C arises. And let's say that there's some quantum mechanical event with outcomes A or B, and that could produce resulting states SA and SB. And let's just say that for whatever reason, the conscious state doesn't change from here to here, which is to say that the quantum event doesn't get correlated into the conscious state. I mean, it may or may not, but here's an example where it doesn't. So then we can just take this further out. Let's say that state A evolves deterministically by physics to some state SA prime, and then that results in some conscious state C prime. And then there's some quantum mechanical branching event where the outcomes are C and D, and then we can imagine other states that result. Now notice in this case that if C obtains, then the resulting conscious state actually does correlate to event C, whereas if D obtains, then the resulting conscious state does not correlate to that event. These are just examples. I'm not stating what is or is not going to happen. These are just examples. And the same for state B. It'll evolve deterministically, and then there's some potential branching to E and F, and that results in other states and other quantum or correlated conscious states. And then, we can go further and say that, for each one of these four events, that then they evolve and they branch and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to stop there because you get the nomenclature at this point. And so what happens if you find yourself in some conscious state that's correlated to event E? Whether it's because you witnessed event E or because event E caused some change in your conscious state. In this case right here. It doesn't really matter. And notice that no free will is required here. No measurement problem arises here. It just so happens that if you find yourself in some conscious state that is correlated to event E, then what you know is that's your state. And because this state was caused by this state, was caused by this state, was caused by this state, then that also means that you also know its history, and everything else just disappears. But now I want to ask, is it possible for the history not to be unique for conscious states? And so to do that, we're going to look at this state right here and flesh that out a little bit further in the next slide. So let's look at state SAD, which for some reason just produces some the same conscious state C. And there's some branching event where the outcomes could be I or J, and that ends up resulting in correlated physical state SADI or SADJ, and it just so happens that the resulting conscious states are also correlated to the events I and J, as you can see. And so my question is it possible for these distinct conscious states, these are different conscious states, to evolve to some identical conscious state that is not correlated to, I meant to say, event I or J? Is that possible? Well, let's see. Consider a possible evolution from here. Let's say there's some additional branching now with outcomes Q or R. That can create these states, and let's say then it produces these conscious states. And then the same for this state down here. There could be some branching into possible results S and T, which then causes these physical states. Notice in this example that this state produces the same conscious state, CAD, as this conscious state. And if that's true, then that would mean that this state CAD does not embed within it its own history of what happened, because there's no way to know whether or not the previous state was CADI or CADJ. So my question then is whether or not this path and this path are both possible paths. Is it possible for states that are correlated to different quantum mechanical outcomes to evolve into conscious states that are not correlated to those same outcomes? That's the question that I intend to answer in my other video, and I find that those different paths are not possible, which means that every conscious state uniquely determines its own history from a previous state. And again, I haven't proven that here, but that is the line of reasoning. So let me make some comments. So I've spent almost about 15 minutes. Just realize that these are just little snippets and that the actual arguments and proofs are further expanded in the other videos. They take different approaches, but they come to similar conclusions. And the conclusions are, you can't, for whatever reason, copy a conscious state, and consciousness is not algorithmic. Now, that might end up being easily physically explainable by the quantum no-cloning theorem, for example. There may be other reasons, but for right now, the popular opinion is that, oh, there's no problem with copying brain states or conscious states or uploading minds to computers, etc. But both videos come to the conclusions that, no, these are not possible. If I'm right, then these are game-changing implications. It means that mind uploading is not possible. We'll never be able to digitize our consciousness or our awareness. We'll never be able to beam our consciousness throughout the solar system. We will never be able to create a conscious artificial intelligence. There are so many interesting implications that manifest themselves in fascinating science fiction like Black Mirror episodes. They're fascinating, but if I'm right, then they are absolutely physically impossible. I also, in my videos, address a variety of objections. There are a lot of objections and questions about these, and I try to address them as much as possible. And at the end of the day, what I really want is to get feedback from like-minded people who are looking into the nature of consciousness from a physical and scientific point of view. I know that consciousness is a physical phenomenon, and I think and hope that we can actually, in my lifetime, explain it in physical terms. So if you are interested in the videos, please check them out, and thank you for watching.